Hello, everybody, and everyone here. I am Mark Turi. Welcome again to my bi-weekly, that was odd, live. I stumbled over my words already this early into the stream. My bi-weekly lives that I do, of course, twice a week. I am Mark Turi. If you have not already, please like this video and subscribe to my channel. Again, if you haven't already, I am looking for some growth, so I would like to see some input and subscribers. Although my channel analytics are doing quite well, and I'm very happy to be here. Want to say hello to my friend Clearwater Chad. There's my friend. Here he is. Looking forward to seeing this. Oh, of course, now he has his master's degree, so he has his sunglasses on, of course. Please do what Chad says and like that. Like my video and subscribe. We got another friend here, Joe DeCeppo. Hello, Joe. Hello, Irish Mart. Good to see you all here. And of course, good to see Clearwater Chad and Clearwater Chad MSC. Uh, I don't know what that master's is in though, Chad. At least not yet. Um, but you know that Pete has a master's in Pete'sology from the University of Chicago, very esteemed university, of course. Not the actual University of Chicago, mind you, but you know, one of their off-brand campuses. And yeah, so I'm glad to be here. As I mentioned last week, um, on my Wednesday stream, we didn't have a stream yesterday, meaning Saturday, because if you're tuning into this right now on the replay, excuse me, on the replay, it's the 22nd of September. And so yesterday I was on a group trip to another small city in Hungary, and it was very nice. Although we did do a lot of walking, so it was a little bit tiring. And I think I got a little sun, which like is stupid because I put sunscreen on and then of course I forget to reapply, but I think I should be okay. I don't think I have any burns. I think all this redness is just the lights in here, but could be a little bit of sun. Um, but I went to a city. I guess it doesn't matter if I say it or not, but anyways, it's in the north and it has a really large basilica. And it's just interesting. I have no idea. I don't know if anyone out here, of course, grew up Roman Catholic. So I was asking all the people on the tour, like, anybody grew up Catholic? Who grew up Catholic? And of course, a ton of people do, because most of the people I was with are Hungarian, like international students of Hungarian origin. And everyone was like, "Yeah, this is what you do, and you know, you walk here, and this is the pews." And I'm like, "Do you guys actually like kneel on these kneelers inside the pews?" And they're looking at me like they're like, "Yeah, they're called kneelers. That's why you kneel on them." I'm like, "Doesn't it hurt?" And they're like, "Well, yeah, some churches have like big padded mirrors. Excuse me, padded. What do we call them? Kneelers. But, like, this particular church didn't have one, so they'd be like, "Yeah, we just sit in our pews," and the pews were uncomfortable, but it was, like, a really old church, so I understand. And then we went to the gift shop, and I was like, "Okay, anybody who's Catholic, can you tell me, like, what's going on in the gift shop?" Like, I totally understand the candles with the saints. I understand the statues, like, I get it, you know, with the Virgin Mary or Jesus, that's all cool. But then they had all these books, and I didn't realize how many saints there were in the Roman Catholic Church, and they must have had these, like, prayer books or something with all these different saints, and in the book and it was all written in Hungarian, but I can understand some of it. There was, like, the life story of the saint, what the saint did to, like, attain their sainthood, I guess if that's what you call it. And yes, it was at a gift shop in the church, and then they had, like, specific prayers that you're supposed to say to the saint, and I was just like, "Wow, there's just a lot of saints," because I kept it was in this little book, it was almost like a drawer. I kept pulling them out, and I was like, "Wow, Saint Maria, Saint Daniel, Saint Francis, Saint Stephen, Saint this, Saint that, Saint that." I was like, "Wow, this is, like, really cool," and I only pulled out maybe, like, 4 or 5 of them, and there was probably like 300 of these different saints, and I was like, that's a lot of people. And then, of course, they were selling rosaries and stuff, so I wanted a friend of mine come over and be like, because he's Catholic and he prays, and I'm like, "Says that you like, what is a rosary?" He's like, "Yeah, no, it's just we count prayers, and there's a certain thing that you have to do and counting." And I'm like, "Okay, I guess I get it," but it's kinda cool. There are also, by the way, a lot of synagogues and other, religious, places of worship that do have gift shops, usually for their members. Because if you're the only synagogue in a, you know, sort of a rural area, it might be the only place you can buy, like, Shabbat candles or kippahs or whatever, so they keep stuff around like that. And then in other religions, they might have specific clothing that people wear, or like, again, even in Judaism, kippahs and stuff like that, which are our head coverings. So they keep them in a gift shop, and they sell them for relatively low cost. But anyways, I thought it was interesting. I actually learned some stuff about Roman Catholicism, which I had not really known before. That Clearwater Chad MSC is not me. Oh, okay. So hopefully he is one of the good guys. Okay, well, I guess you have a copycat doppelganger with a master's degree. I get that. Okay, he's not me. He's one of the good guys. Okay. And then, yeah, gift shops in the church. I've seen them before. Church gift shops, synagogue gift shops, mosques, and so forth. It's not uncommon if the church or whatever is open to tourists, and so I kind of get it. I actually really like church gift shops. I don't know why. I just love them. Um, I really like it. The Hare Krishnas have some interesting gift shops because they'll have clothing, right? Like robes and stuff that you can buy, and I'm always tempted to buy like extremely comfortable robes. Not to wear them outside or anything, because when it's cold, but just to wear them inside, and just look like a Hare Krishna monk, which is a kurta and like a nice comfortable, pants. And they're usually like less than $20 for both, so they're usually pretty inexpensive. But that's how you get Scientology, of course, has a bookstore, as we know. They don't really have a gift shop, but they have a bookstore and so on. So for some reason, after Scientology, I've been somewhat obsessed with bookstores or gift shops or souvenir shops inside churches. And when I was in Los Angeles, there was a group called the Self Realization Fellowship, and they had a place on Hollywood Boulevard next to the Pack base, and they had some gift shops, which was really interesting stuff, and so on. So I don't know. For me, I don't know what it is, but religious gift shops, I'm like a kid in a candy store because I just love knowing and learning and stuff like that. So Joe says, I have a big Indian kurta thing for when it's way too hot. Yes. I call it my moo like in The Simpsons. Yeah. Press the, please press the any key. Where's the any key? I think I'll have a tab. I just came here to watch Honk If You're Horny in peace. Don't get me started, Joe. Sorry, with The Simpsons, I literally go all day. Hey, fatty, I got a movie for you. A Fridge Too Far. Again, Joe, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I heard the word Simpsons, and now it's all coming back. Yeah, I would never wear it outside either. Yeah. So we get each other. Cultural and ethnic clothing that we are as white people appropriating, and that's why we don't go outside in it. But those kurtas are nice. My friends from South Asia have been wanting me to buy one for years, and I keep saying I'll go to India because it's probably cheaper for me to go to India to buy a kurta than to buy a kurta here, and it probably is. I've also known people who are South Asian, whom when they have a wedding, they do all of their shopping in Dubai because it's actually cheaper to fly to Dubai to buy um, like dozens, if not hundreds, of dresses and suits and kurtas, and then bring them back to Canada, for example, which is quite interesting, I think. But one day, one day. Um, But yeah, we have I hope it's an interesting lecture today. It will be more of a lecture, PowerPoint presentation on Romance speaking speakers, minorities in the Romance speaking minority groups in the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and specifically around the Adriatic Sea and the Adriatic coast, including an area called Istria. And again, I hope it's interesting. I really like Romance languages, as you guys know. I like a lot of different languages, again, but Romance languages, especially the smaller ones, have been just an interest to me. So, the origin of the Romance languages, as I've mentioned before on my history of Romania, which again is on this channel, it's my most viewed video on this channel. I think it has over 130 views, maybe 140 views right now. And so during this time, of course, of the Romans spread Latin throughout the Roman Empire. And that, of course, spread it all the way into what's today France, parts of Germany, and the Balkans, and the Italian peninsula, as well as what's called Hispania, which, of course, is Portugal and Spain, and then spread it to North Africa, spread it to Romania, spread it to Crimea, spread it like all over the place. And that Latin would then have different kinds of Latin, one of which is classical Latin, and the other is vulgar Latin, which was the Latin of the people. And then over the years, languages like French evolved from a mixture of a Celtic language and Latin, and then throw in some what was called Frankish, and that is French. Portuguese rather, and Spanish are also mixed between some Celtic, although more Celtic in Portugal, and also other languages with Latin to become Spanish. And then Italy, of course, has the more Italo branches, and their dialects usually are affected by, if they're in the north, then they have maybe a little more Germanic Celtic. And then if they're in the south, they might have a bit more Arabic and Greek and even Albanian. And then in the Balkans, we get Romanian, of course, which again I mentioned is a sort of a fusion between, or at least I shouldn't say fusion grammatically. It's just more of a fusion when it comes to vocabulary and influence with Slavic languages, Turkish, Hungarian, also a little bit of German, and so forth. So it's also very unique. But there are also a number of regional languages within Switzerland, Italy, and Croatia that I think are very interesting. Now, I'm not going to go over all of them, but I will touch on some of them today. So, for example, in Switzerland, in eastern Switzerland, there's a language that is spoken called Romansh, and this is referred to as a Raetic or Retic Romance language that comes from the Alps. It's spoken there by very few people. Certainly, Switzerland has more German speakers than French and then Italian speakers, and their German has a wide variety of dialects. Their French is more like the Eastern French dialects, and their Italian is actually pretty standardized and is closer to the northern dialects of the bordering areas. But this Romansh is very interesting sounding because, of course, it's surrounded by a lot of Germanic speakers, and I have heard people online speak Romansh. I've never heard them, people speak it in person. But to me, it sounds like a bit of a heavier, slightly Germanic accent with those more Latin words and Latin roots. So it's really quite interesting. It's a quite a fascinating language. I would actually like to go to areas and cities in Switzerland where Romansh is used every day, just to sort of observe it because it's quite nice. In Italy, there are two languages that are not Italian. Of course, there are several Italian dialects. There's lots of them, and one of them is its own two of them, I should say, have their own separate languages. So one is called Ladin, and the other is called Friulian. And I also believe that they are two Retic Romance languages, and they're not Italian. They're further enough away from Italy. But Ladin is kind of in the northeast, and so is Friulian, and Friulian sort of borders on Slovenia, and Ladin is just west of that area, so it's more bordered, I think, on Austria. But these languages also, if you were to hear them from afar, you'd probably be able to think, oh, they maybe sound a little Italian. But when you get close enough to them, you realize pronunciation, vocabulary is different. And if you were to speak, for example, the standardized Italian or another dialect of Italian, even a northern Italian dialect like Venetian or something or Lombard, you wouldn't be able to understand them if you spoke that language. So this is why they're categorized differently. And so these languages just fascinate me because, again, I grew up learning French and Spanish, and I'm learning Spanish now, and I learned Romanian. I just find that there is a really interesting sound to these languages. They may sound similar in many ways because a lot of them will quote unquote sound more Italian, but that just means that they have that structure and that kind of sing-songy way that Italians speak, and it's why they call it romance in one sense. It's a very nice romance, meaning that it comes from Rome, um, but obviously too because it does have a very appealing type to hear it. And it's got a very interesting structure, very interesting sound. So Joe, as far as Dalmatian is concerned, we'll go later today than Dalmatia, but Dalmatian was, of course, um, there is a group of languages called Italo-Dalmatian. We're going to speak about one of them today, which is a very small language in Croatia. But there used to be, of course, a Dalmatian language, and that was a bridge language. That was the bridge at one point between the Italian dialects in Italy as well as Romanian. Now, they were still considered to be Western Romance languages, these particular languages. So they weren't Eastern, meaning that they weren't closer to Romanian, they were closer to Venetian and things like this. But they had been in decline for many, many years, especially with the fall of the Roman Empire and the rise of the Ottomans. And then when nationalism took hold, especially in Croatia, the Croatian language replaced a lot of these Croatian Romance or Dalmatian Romance languages, and I want to say it was in the 18th or 19th century when the last speaker died. I think he like died in a car accident. So maybe it would have been then 19th century, I guess, right? Or he died in an automobile accident or something. Maybe it wasn't automobiles because that's the early 20th century. Now that I'm thinking about it, but he did pass away, and he was the only like remaining speaker, and it has not yet been revived. So there hasn't been a reconstruction, which has been interesting because several languages all around the world within the past 15, 20, 30 years have gone extinct. And languages like Cornish and so forth have had this reawakening, including many indigenous languages, but possibly because Dalmatian had died out at least by the 19th century, if not the 18th century. So it obviously wouldn't have been a locomotive accident. It would have been maybe something, maybe a carriage or something, or a train accident. But whatever it was, where this person passed away, he was the only person left. What's interesting though is there's a library. There were books, there were grammar books, like things were made of Dalmatian, and a lot of them I think is preserved either in Croatia, or Italy, or around. So, for example, there was an alphabet and so forth. So, at least on that part, like if somebody kind of wanted to learn Dalmatian, there would be still some way of doing it. And you can see a lot of translations online, and there are pages like on Wikipedia has a page on the Dalmatian language. So does Encyclopedia Britannica, and all these other different kinds of encyclopedic as well as archival websites. And so you can actually learn the alphabet and stuff. And when you sort of speak it and read it, it does sound very, Italian, and it does sound very Italian or Italian, in like Venetian kind of Italian, which is not maybe not the same as Tuscan, which when we think of Italian, or when I think of Italian, is again it's that more flowing, standardized version. There are versions that sound a little different. For example, they might cut off consonants at the end or whatever. They have different ways of pronouncing things. So, it might not be exactly the same, but it does sound pretty good and pretty interesting. And I think if anybody knew Italian or they knew Venetian or even another like Romance language, they'd be able to connect some dots. But that's for the Dalmatian language, and that again is something I'm not as familiar with, although it does still fascinate me. But unfortunately, it is a dead language. So today, what we're going to do is we're going to learn um, about the minority language in Austria-Hungary. And again, Austria-Hungary was established, of course, in 1867. So by the time 1867 had come around, I guess Dalmatian had been extinct. But of course, there were still Romance speakers that lived in the Austro-Hungarian Empire. So we're going to look especially with the Adriatic region. So again, the Adriatic Sea today mainly is a part of it is Italy. There's a small piece of Slovenia, and then most of it is Croatia, all the way down to Montenegro, and then even into Albania and parts of Greece, including the Greek islands of Corfu and Zakynthos and the western sort of islands. So it's a big sea. And on the other side, of course, you have eastern Italy. So you've got cities like Bari and Ravenna, Venice, of course, and so on. So quite a large area. But what we're going to do first is we're going to talk a little bit now about the origins of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, which was established with what was called the Ausgleich, which is also known as the Compromise of 1867. What's interesting about this is the country I was born in, Canada, also became officially a dominion of Great Britain, but was considered to be independent of Great Britain in 1867, same year. Of course, we're still going strong, and the empire would not survive the uh, past the 1920s, past the First World War. But that's neither here or there. And in the Austro-Hungarian Empire was established in 1867, as I mentioned before, when the Kingdom of Austria and the Kingdom of Hungary joined together into what was called the dual monarchy. And why that happened was because in the middle to early um, 1800s, so the 19th century, the Hungarians were under the rule of the Austrian Empire, and they didn't really want to be part of the Austrian Empire. And Austria in 1866, a year before this, fought a war with Prussia, and Prussia kicked them out of the German Confederation, which had been established after Napoleon in 1815. And there were a lot of things going on with nationalism. And in order to satisfy the Hungarians, which wanted to split up, they formed this compromise. And again, the compromise, of course, meant that Austria in its crown lands, which I'm going to show you a map of in a moment, and Hungary in its crown lands would have two different parliaments, basically two sets of laws and so forth. And of course, it would remain until roughly till 1918, but officially, I think it was either 1920 or 1921 when what was called the Treaty of Trianon, which was the first treaty that broke up Hungary, and that was again in 2021. And then the Treaty of Saint Germain, which broke up um, Austria. And actually, I misspoke there. The first one to happen, which I think was either 1918, 19, or 20, was the Treaty of Saint Germain. And then the second one, rather, was the Treaty of Trianon. So by 1921, the Austro-Hungarian Empire had been dissolved. Between 1918 and 1921, all of their lands had been given to establish other nations, which we're going to see here in a moment, and so on. So that's just a brief history. And I can go into that more in a later slide if you'd like, but that's sort of the brief history of the relevant part of what's going on here. And of course, we have two crowns, two emblems here, two insignias. You can see the Austrian is on the left. It has its crown, and it's three colored, red, and then white, and then red. And then we have Hungary, which of course has its crown, and then our emblem there, which has the cross in the middle, and so on. So these were two very different kingdoms, two different languages. German, of course, used in Austria, and Hungarian used in Hungary. Joe writes, Cornish is irrelevant. You can't understand Cornish people, even when they speak English. My partner from Dorset, who has strong opinions about scones, jams, and cream. I do like a good scone, let me tell you. Yeah, Trianon, Trianon. Yeah, I know. Believe me, we say Trianan in Canada or Trianon in Hungarian, but yeah, Trianon, Trianon. I know my French. I know my French, sadly. Um, yeah, Trianon, I think, or Trianon, Trianon. Anywho, yeah. That French pronunciation is it's not easy, put it that way. Um, so the only emperor that was around, well, one of there was actually only two emperors, excuse me, to be around during the tenure of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and that, of course, was this gentleman, Emperor Franz Joseph the First, or Franz Josef the First, or we call him Ferenc József Első, Franz Josef Erste if you're German, and there's so many. I mean, there were 16 languages in the country, so he had about 16 different names. Um, and yeah, Franz Josef Erste, Franz Joseph the First, Ferenc József Első, and on and on and on. And he was born, of course, in 1830, August 1830, and he died 2 years before the war ended in November 1916. So when he was 18 years old in 1848, his uncle, who was named Ferdinand the First, renounced his throne under pressure of the national revolutions, which again I do want to make um, an 1848 revolution PowerPoint, which I'd like to do in the future as well, because it's a very fascinating year and time to be in Europe. But he's 18 years old. He's given the crown by his uncle Ferdinand the First, also a gentleman who unfortunately had a lot of physical and mental disabilities because he was born with well, being inbred um, in his background, and so he did have some issues, but he was unable to continue on the throne, and so his nephew Franz Joseph takes throne, and he's there for what is that? 86 years. He's on the throne for about 86 years, give or take, of course, until he dies, 21st November 1916, at the Schönbrunn Palace in Vienna, which is also where he's born. And then his nephew takes over, who is sometimes called Charles, and he's the last emperor who then advocates his throne. And then, of course, those treaties of Saint Germain and the Treaty of Trianon take place, and Charles doesn't really have a choice, and so he, you know, uh, just sort of fades away as the last emperor. Now, in Franz Joseph, I think a couple of things that might be of interest. Of course, he was married to a woman named, we call her Sisi here in Hungary. She has her own palace, which was like a getaway weekend home in a small city called Gödöllő, which is, I don't know, what is it, an hour east of here, and you can go see her palace. Many female historians love her, fashion historians, because she was very trendy. She was a very beautiful woman. She was German, I believe she was Bavarian, but she had a really like remarkable connection to Hungary. She spoke Hungarian. She loved the Hungarian people. Decadence, of course, very glamorous, very luxurious type person, and so she's even to this day known, among scholars of social history, feminist history, history of culture and fashion, and so forth, particularly in Hungary, male and female, of course. But there seems to be a sort of collective female sort of appreciation for CC and so on. and a lot of people, of course, go to her castle to see her outfits, where she lived, and so forth. She had children. She had the Crown Prince Rudolf, who tragically died in a murder suicide with his mistress in the 1890s, and later in the early part of the 1890s and in the later part of the 1890s, Sisi herself was assassinated in Geneva, Switzerland, by an Italian anarchist. So by the time, and then of course, 1914, Franz Joseph's nephew, of course, we know as the Archduke Franz Ferdinand, is assassinated with his wife, Sophie, in Sarajevo. So the last person to then be in charge was this Charles. And he lived a life where he outlived his son, outlived his wife, outlived his nephew, and died as an old man in his castle palace in 1916. And the other big point about Franz Josef is that compared to Franz Ferdinand, Franz Josef was quite a conservative. He was a traditionalist, and he really wanted to keep the Austro-Hungarian Empire together, even though there were many different periods in time when it could have fallen apart. For example, in 1878, almost immediately after becoming its own nation, the Russo-Turkish War resulted in the establishment of Romania as a kingdom, Bulgaria, Montenegro, and Serbia. Then, of course, Croatia and Bosnia would be put under the sphere of influence within the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and of course, by 1908, you have the Bosnia crisis when Austria fully integrates and annexes Bosnia, and then we have 1914, and so there's a lot of nationalism going on, and this was, you know, Franz Josef was that person. He was that conservative traditionalist sort of facilitator that wanted the old ways, whereas Franz Ferdinand and even Charles the Fifth, who were of the younger generation, were more liberal, and they wanted to have a federation. And it was also proposed in around 1910 by Franz Ferdinand that in the future, had there not been a war, he would have liked to have seen there being an Austro-Hungarian Slavic Empire, where they would have created a third kingdom, and they would have created a kingdom for the West Slavs, so of the Poles, Ukrainians, although Ukrainians are not West Slavics, that's probably what it would have been called, or something like this, and the Czech Slovaks and so forth in the north, and then in the south, between the Bosnians, the Croatians, and the Slovenians, and they would have had their own parliament. And so there was kind of this very interesting federalization going on, but of course, history is what it was, and they didn't get to see it. But I sort of look at Franz Josef as a great facilitator trying to hold all of these nations together and all of these people. And this is one of the things that is so vast about the Austro-Hungarian Empire is that if we see, this map, and I'm going to go to full screen in a moment. Actually, I'll go full screen and then I'll come back. I can't see full screen. I don't know why in the chat. I can't see the chat in the full screen mode for some reason. So bear with me. But um, if we look at these are all these sort of might call provinces or territories. So if we look at the Empire of Austria, they obviously have quite a substantial number of provinces. Kingdom of Hungary, even though it's just Hungary and Croatia, Slavonia, it still has a lot of area. And then finally, they put, of course, Bosnia and Herzegovina as a continuum, which of course was annexed later on. But if we look through all of these different regions and different areas, we've got Austria, Italy, Slovenia, Croatia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Serbia. We've got Romania, Hungary. We, of course, have the Czech and Slovak republics. We have Poland, and then we have Ukraine. And previous to this, we also had Yugoslavia, we had Czechoslovakia, and we had parts of this, especially in the east, going to the Soviet Union. So this is just a large, large, large area. And I think what's interesting, what we're going to focus on today, is if we look at number 7. And number 7 is the territory, province called the Austrian Littoral. And of course, its capital is Trieste, which today is a large port city in Italy. And it's here that we are going to look at a couple of Romance languages that are in decline, but are quite interesting because as we go through these, you'll see that there were Romance speakers, especially in this map. There were quite a lot of Romance speakers in the empire, but a lot after this, after World War One, a lot of those Romance speakers would end up in Yugoslavia, and there was some problems that happened there. So, in the first case, first thing to know about this map is that this is a map that is written in Hungarian. So, Az Osztrák-Magyar Monarchia Népel, which is the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Osztrák is the nationality, like it means Austrian. And not Austria, we actually say Austria for Austria, but for some reason we say Osztrák for the Austrian nationality. And Magyar or Magyar is Hungarian. And of course, Monarchia, well, there's a pretty simple monarchy. And we can see here that we have a lot of different colors. Now, um, because they're in Hungarian, some of it is self-explanatory, but we'll go through them just a little bit. The first one, because this is a Hungarian map, Hungarians are first. So beside the orange at the bottom, in the bottom right, it's called Magyar. And we can see that most of the orange in this map takes up the center as well as the east of the map that connects onto what you can see is Romania. And Romania was kind of a backwards L-shaped country at this time. For more of that, you can also listen or to go to and watch a presentation that I gave to the Nerdy Bunch on the history of Romania from around World War One until the fall of communism. But this backward L-shaped Romania, and there's a large, large part of here that's orange because this is what's called the Székely land, and this is majority Hungarian with some spreads, little dots of Hungarian throughout Romania and even in parts of Serbia and Croatia, which was Yugoslavia at the time. The yellow is called Nemet, if anyone knows a Slavic language. Like in Polish, Germans are Niemiecki, so Nemet is the name for Germans. We took the Slavic word. And you can see that there's a lot of yellow around Austria, as well on the border between Németország, which is, or Németország, which is, excuse me, pardon me, which of course is Germany. And that was called the Sudetenland. That would be important for World War II. But there's like tons and tons of yellow. There's a spot of it in Slovenia, right where it says Krajina. You have all throughout Hungary, all throughout Yugoslavia, and quite a bit around Romania and even up towards Poland. Green are Romanians, which is mostly delegated to what's today's Romania and also parts of Ukraine and Serbia. The Czechs, of course, we can see are all around the yellow there, and what would be around Prague and Brno. They're in that kind of a dark purple color where it says Czechország, and it says, which is Czech Republic or Czechia. And then there's also a word here that says Mordva Orszag, that means Moravia. So those were ethnic Czechs. Slovaks are next. You can see that it's a very light pink color that's just above Hungary, wedged between Hungary and the Czech lands. And of course, they have cities like Pozsony and Košice. The Czechs, they were a part of, we go back here, excuse me, the Slovaks, rather, I'm so sorry. The Slovaks were actually part of Hungary, and they were incorporated into Hungary, but they were not given a province. They were not given autonomy. Whereas you can see here that at least Bohemia, excuse me, and Moravia number 1 and number 9 in this map were part of Austria, and they were considered separate provinces, but Slovakia was not considered a province under the Kingdom of Hungary, but they are there. And next is, if you go up top, it's a dark pink color. It says Lędziel, and this is Poland, including the city of Krakow or Krakow, which is Krakow. Next to that, in the top upper right-hand corner, are the Ruthene, which would also be called Ruthenian, Rusine, or even Ukrainians. And this is part of Eastern Galicia, including the cities of Lviv or Lemberg. But then we're going to get to the Romance speakers. So I'm going to skip those two blue sections for a second and quickly go over the Slovenes, which are around Slovenia, Ljubljana, and where it says Krajina, which of course looks like kind of a light brown color in the former Yugoslavia. And then after that, we have Horvat, which are the Croatians, and another light pink color, which you can see all throughout what is today Croatia and also parts of Bosnia. We then have the Muslims, or the Bosniaks, who are in this kind of middle pink or middle purple color, pink purple color. That's mostly in Bosnia, scattered around what is today Bosnia. And of course, finally, you're going to look at the Serbs, and the Serbs are in red, and they're today in parts, closer to the Hungarian border, the Romanian border, all throughout Bosnia, and of course, all throughout the borders there with Montenegro and all throughout Croatia. And you can see where Serbia is there at the bottom. It says Serbia. It's spelled SZ. I call it a ZZ. Of course, Z for our American friends and Z for our Commonwealth and other friends. But that word SZZERBIA, that's Serbia. So now what we're going to do is I want to focus on those blue colors, because this is where we're going to get into today's full topic. So in this case, we have Italian speakers. The word for Italy, in Italian in Hungarian is called Olas, and they're in the dark blue. So we can see that there's a piece of dark blue that borders on Austria, which is called Tyrol, which of course is right in the east there, right on the left, the center left of our photo. And this place is called South Tyrol, which was given to Italy following, I believe it was either following World War I or World War II. And so there were lots of Italian and German speakers there, but you could also see that if we look up again to Slovenia, where it says Krajina, right on the north part of the Adriatic Sea, you can see that near the border, there's a piece of blue between the Italian and Slovenian border. And then this peninsula that sticks out, this is Istria, and I'll go and be more focused on that in a moment. But you can see there's quite a few blue areas because there were lots of ethnic Italians. There was also an ethnic Italian community living in Croatia, as well as the islands. And particularly, you can also see some light blue colors in that area of Tyrol, and some light blue colors in what is today, or what in here is part of the Slovenian majority, which, if we go back here, is again part of Austrian Littoral and so forth. So this is a very interesting multi-ethnic, place to live, as a lot of these places were of course split up and multi-ethnic. For example, Galicia was either mostly Polish, Ukrainian, German. I mean, the Austrian littoral, we're going to get into it, but it was mostly Italian, Slovenian, Croatian, Serbian. You go to Bohemia, it was Czechs and Germans. Moravia was Czechs and Germans, and so on and so on. So almost all of these places in Bosnia, Serbs, Croats, Bosnians. In Croatia, they had Croatians. Of course, they had Serbs. They also had Muslims, and on and on and on. So it's a lot of very interesting, you know, um, lot of interesting, multi-ethnic and multi-religious kind of areas, and Austrian Littoral was one of them. So, yeah, fun fact, yep, Lemberg is now Lviv in Western Ukraine. I've wanted to go there for a long time because It's very much a Western Austrian type city, especially when it comes to architecture. So I've always wanted to go there. Unfortunately, can't, but have always wanted to. It was following World War One and returned for Italy's limited role. Okay, the Entente Südtirol is still to this day has a majority German speakers, and they also have a separatist movement. And of course, there are two Galicias. Yes, there's the Galicia that's on top of Portugal, which is actually they speak Galician, which is closer to Portuguese. That's where Francisco Franco was born. Uh, Unfortunately, a place where it rains a lot, I'm told. And yes, that's Galicia in Iberia, Hispania. But this is another Galicia. This is the Kingdom of Galicia, which is again mostly Polish, Ukrainian, German, lots of and as far as by the way, I also want to talk about the a little bit about the Jewish community, just briefly here. Almost every place you see a red dot on this map had a Jewish community, and in particular, I mean Budapest, where I live, had a massive Jewish community. Vienna, I just read a book about the history of the Jewish community in Vienna during the time of Franz Joseph I, and a lot of um, Jewish people from Galicia. So on this one, number six. So mostly Ukrainian Yiddish speakers, Polish speakers came from like places like Lemberg, and there's another city here called Chernowitz, which today is in Ukraine as well. And they would move, of course, to Vienna in order to be free and not be discriminated against. And almost all of these individuals were extremely ultra orthodox. And again, it might be cut off here, but you can see I'll just go down through these because it is a little bit cut off. So I apologize for that. Actually, let me see if I can just switch that perspective. And then that way you guys can see, oops, you guys can see what I'm talking about. And just in a moment here, that's probably better. That's better. Okay, there we go. So I'll keep it like this for the rest of the slide. But yeah, so I'm not going to go through all of them, but you can see the 15 provinces in the Kingdom of Austria. There's two in Hungary, and then of course the Austro-Hungarian continuum was Bosnia and Herzegovina. We talked about ethnicities, and we're going to focus now on Romance language speakers. So here's a bit of a better picture, a bit of a closer picture of what this province, if you want to call it, or territory within the Austro-Hungarian Empire was. It was the Austrian littoral, and you can see again today it's got most of the northeastern coast of the Adriatic Sea, including its majority part on the south is called the Istrian Peninsula, a couple islands, and then it ran north all the way through and past what today would be Italy and even into Slovenia and Austria. So it was a very, again, multi-ethnic area. In the south, though, we're going to focus a little bit more because that's where the Romance speakers were. So in the second picture, the one on the right, is the Istrian Peninsula or the Istrian Peninsula. And this is a map that's just before the just before the First World War, just before World War One. So like early 20th century. And the yellow color are the color of the people who speak Italo-Dalmatian. Really, the closest dialect of that would be like the Venetian kind of dialects, or the sort of the eastern, northeastern Italian languages and dialects. I'm not 100% sure how different Italo-Dalmatian is to the rest of Italian, but that's sort of its closest. And I mean, there still are Dalmatian dialects being spoken in Italy today. I believe Venetian is one of them, but someone can check that for me. But essentially, it was more like an Italian dialect rather than its own language. But we can see here that there's these green spots, and this is a language called Istriot or Istriot. And then there's a couple purple spots, which is called Istro-Romanian. If you go back and you look at my history of the of the Romanian language video, which again has over 130 views, my most watched video, I do mention the Istra-Romanian peoples. To note, though, that even though these are all Romance speaking languages, The Italo-Dalmatian speakers have a closer association to Venetian, and thus they're closerly linked or closer linked to the Italian language as a whole. Istriot is not really exactly known where it comes from, but some scholars believe that it is another branch of that what I refer to as a Reto or Rhaeto-Romance language. So maybe it's related in some way to Ladine and Friulian, as well as Romansh, but it's not really known because it's such a small language, and there are not too many speakers. But it definitely sounds a lot more like a Romance language and more like Italian in some ways, or at least like an Italian mixed with another language. And then, of course, Istro-Romanian is a form of Romanian. It's considered its own language. It's not a dialect. I might have used that word dialect in my Romanian language PowerPoint, but it is not. It is considered its own language, and it is, something that has been in this part of the world, Istria, for quite a long time. And even though it has more roots in the Eastern Romance languages, as opposed to the Italo-Dalmatian, of course, and Istriot or Western Romance languages. Istro-Romanian is still has a much deeper connection to the Latin that would have then eventually become Romanian, as opposed to the Latin that would have become Italian or Rhaeto-Romance in the other examples. When we look at statistics on the Romance languages in the Austrian littoral, I think I pointed out before, but the very final census that was taken in the Austro-Hungarian Empire gives us a lot of insight because it was taken in 1910. They took a census every 5 years. Of course, they weren't able to do it in 1915 because they were at war. And then in 1920, they were no longer a country. So 1910 is the final one. And if we look at this here, we will see that the entire, and again, if it's a little smaller or unreadable, I apologize. But it looks like in total, around, what does it say here? 67% of the people in Austrian littoral are Italians, which was an estimated between 60 and 70,000 people. And excuse me, I'm so sorry, it wasn't 67%. Forgive me. Um, it's actually, what is it, 38%, almost 39%. Forgive me on that. And that included the language of Friulian, which I mentioned before, because Friulian is its own separate language that is spoken again in the east, which today is in Italy but borders Slovenia. We then have Slovenians, so ethnic Slovenians, and that's almost 30%. We then have Serbo-Croats, which is a term that just, of course, means Serbs and Croatians, because some people will say they do speak one language. I kind of believe that, but they don't. However, they make up around 20% of the territory, and then Germans you can see around 3%, and then others are around 7. But if we look in very specific areas, so the northern part of Austrian littoral has a city called Gorizia, and so this is what's being indicated in the below, which is called, where we can see here Gorizia. And so in that area of Gorizia, which is a city again in northeastern Italy, close to the Slovenian border, it was 58% Slovenian at one point. And then we can see Italians were roughly 36% and Germans at 2%. And then the remainder would have been other people groups. In the city of Trieste, which today is in Italy, in 1910, only 51, almost 52% of the people were Italians. I mean, that's a lot of people, but it's obviously, only a small majority, very small majority. It's just above half. But we can see here that there were quite a few Slovenians at 24%, roughly 20, almost 25%. Germans was just over 5%. Serbo-Croatians at 1%, others under a percent. And then here it said non-Austrian citizens, among them from Italy. So there were quite a lot of Italian citizens who were living in Trieste at the time, probably doing business as merchants and things like this, and they had almost 17%. If we go to Istria, there's a whole totally different part of that because now we have 43% are of Serbian or Croatian, so they're speaking a Serbo-Croatian Slavic language. A very large minority of 36% Italian, 14% Slovenian, and also because of administration, this is one of the reasons why there's a small German minority, is because of they're mostly Austrians, probably bureaucrats and politicians and so forth that are ministers of the government and so forth, and they're in these places to make sure that they're still part of Austria-Hungary. And because they are part of the German crown lands and the Austrian crown lands, they're going to be, ethnic Germans with, speaking German or at least Austrian German. And so, yeah, I'll go through sort of these two different people groups now, which is we can see that there was this big mix of different peoples in Austrian littoral, and for many, many, hundreds of years, they had transferred hands. A lot of the Austrian littoral at one point was part of the Republic of Venice, which, of course, was a maritime uh, republic or well, I guess not an empire, but more of a republic that spread all the way down to the Greek islands. Had Cyprus at one point, had different ports, including in Montenegro. They were never like a country that had one steady geographical line. They just had a lot of inland ports and islands, and a lot of those places that Venice had were associated, and then would become part of Austria-Hungary, especially Dalmatia and so forth, and especially in Austrian littoral. So these two photos here are not like 100% representations of these two people groups, because of course, like all people groups, there'd be different classes and so on. But when I did information and research, and got information about this, because I think I forgot to mention, and I apologize for that, that this presentation is based on a presentation that I gave for a class, like I guess maybe a year or two ago. And so I was reading a lot about, minority speakers. And what I got from some of the books that I was reading is that the Istro-Romanian people, who again, they speak a language that in and of itself is Romanian, or at least closer to Romanian, and that they were more farmers and peasants and so on, whereas the Istriot people, and which is of course depicted on the right, had more prestige and maybe more nobility. I don't know exactly how 100% that is, but definitely there would have been some upper class and lower class things going on in both societies. But at least that's how the Austrians kind of looked at them. When they saw the Istro-Romanians, they pictured mostly farmers and peasants speaking this very strange, mixture, mostly of Romanian, but also they have a lot of Croatian and Serbian words in their language. And then the Istrio people were mostly today, and mostly back then, were fishermen, and they had a lot to do with fish and merchant transports of fish. Today, and just to go into modern and contemporary times, there are less than 2,000 speakers of each language, and in fact, I think both statistics show that only 1,300 people speak Istro-Romanian and Istriot, and in each case, especially with Istro-Romanian, somewhere less than 200 to 250 people use that language on a daily basis or are fluent. So the remaining 1,100 people have some grasp of it or are, what they call L2, so second language speakers. But Istriot, and that statistic that I got from Croatia was 15 years ago. So they said 1,300 people may speak it, but it's really only spoken daily by a small group of fishermen who live in the coastal towns of the Istrian Peninsula, especially a city called Rovin and Pula. So apparently, if this is another thing that I want to do, if you go to the docks of those cities and you go to their fishing ports, you will be able to hear a language that sounds like Italian from afar. And these men, who are generally 50, 60 years old, 70 years old, will speak it amongst each other. So it's almost like in these particular towns, it's what you would call the lingua franca of like the fishermen in these towns. And again, I've only seen this and watched this from documentaries, which is why I'd like to go there and to see and confirm if what I was learning was true. I have a suspicion it may be, but of course, like everything, you have to take everything with a grain of salt. But, yeah, I'm hoping one day that I can get to these villages and these places to hear them. Istro-Romania, does have a festival each year in Croatia. Again, there's only, like, 2 towns that speak it, so one of those 2 towns people come, and a lot of Romanians go as well because to them it's interesting. They can sort of, they hear this language that's, endangered and possibly will be extinct by the year 2100, and then again, it's the same with Istriot. I'd like to just at least go to the fishermen ports and hear if these people are, still able to speak it, and how many fishermen are actually speaking it today. It's probably again a very small number. Now, one of the things that of course happened after, and let me just check to see the chat. Oh, hey Pete. How are you, Pete? Yes, please everybody like and subscribe. Thank you so much. Got a couple slides left, but thank you for coming on, Pete. I appreciate your support so much. Thank you. So one of the things, of course, about the Austro-Hungarian Empire, as we all know, is it breaks up, and several new states are administered and created in the wake of the Treaty of Saint Germain, and of course the Treaty of Trianon. We get Czechoslovakia, we get what was the Republic of Austria, the Republic of Hungary, we get Yugoslavia, and of course Transylvania becomes part of Romania. Vojvodina becomes part of Serbia. Again, Czech, the Slovaks get parts of their southern areas, predominantly Hungarian. Austria loses South Tyrol, and Hungary will lose some territory again to its neighboring countries. We can see here that Galicia gets split by Poland and Ukraine. And when we go to the Austrian littoral, there are three countries that take it. So we can see here at the end of World War One, and then what's very interesting is also the end of World War Two. So at the end of World War One, of course, Yugoslavia is created, and the city of Trieste remains in Italian hands. What is today Slovenia and Croatia, of course, are part of one country. After World War Two, and I mentioned from going back to this slide, you can see a lot of ethnic Italians here. Okay, you see all this dark blue on the Adriatic coast. These are ethnic Italians, right? And the only people to sort of escape this were the Istriot peoples and the Istro-Romanians, although because of the war, and both wars, their populations were decimated. But they weren't considered, like Istriots and Istro-Romanians were not considered to be ethnic Italians. So when World War II was ending, there was a very large population swap, something what was called the Dalmatian Italian or the Italo-Dalmatian exodus. So in Istria, especially in the south of what is today Croatia, there were a lot of Italian speakers and ethnic Italians who had been there for a very, very long time. Well, this was going to become Yugoslavia, and they needed land for these new Yugoslavians. And so what did they do? The Yugoslavian government uh, basically kicked out the ethnic Italians, and many ended up in Trieste. One of those people would be the race car driver Mario Andretti. I believe he was born shortly after the war in like the mid 1940s, and when he was a child, he was living with his family. He and his family were and he was born in Istria, and then his family moved, and they had to walk a long, long time. Wasn't just Italians, of course, but of course many Germans and many ethnic peoples. There are large population swaps, including after World War One. But this is what it looks like today. When Yugoslavia breaks up, of course, in 1991, we can see here that most of Istria becomes part of Croatia, including what is the city of Rijeka, which you can see here, which is in the sort of eastern part of our map. That was also called Fiume, which is an Italian name and word, and it was a big port and navy port for the Austro-Hungarian Empire. You can see Pula, which is in the south, and you can see Trieste in the north. In Slovenia, there's a city there called Koper, which is on the coast. So they've got a small piece there of Istria, of northern Istria. And then today, this is the Austrian littoral. So we can see Venice, right? The biggest city in the area, home of the Venetians and so forth. Beautiful city. I was there in the summer. Trieste is another beautiful city. I was also there in the summer. And we can see Pula and Rijeka in the north. There's Ljubljana, which is the capital of Slovenia. And there's a city there called Udine. Udine in Gorizia. Udine was also part of Austrian littoral. And so today they're in that Friulian type area that I mentioned before. The one last thing I want to say before going is because I'm a bit of a interested in Yugoslavian history, and I hope some people find this interesting. But one of the reasons, and I might have mentioned this before, I can't remember, maybe I did. But one of the reasons why Tito and Stalin split, there were obviously lots of reasons, but Tito really, really wanted the city of Trieste. So if we go back here, he wanted Trieste to be a part of Yugoslavia. So that way he had Rijeka, Pula, and Trieste, and those were big, massive, giant ports. Specifically Rijeka, big port. But Trieste, because it was in Italy, it was more of a modern port. Rijeka was an Austro-Hungarian port, and it was still a good port, but Trieste was much better, more technologically modern. And that was, again, one of many reasons. However, Stalin decided to work with the Allies and other people when they were carving up the map after the Second World War, and to keep Trieste within Italy. And the reason he did that is because he thought by giving or keeping Trieste in Italy, then the Italian Communist Party would have some kind of control over it, and that Italy would go communist. That was his hopes, and this started one of many things that started this rift. And of course, Tito did not get his way. They separated in 48. Stalin died first, Tito died after, and he was very much anti Stalin. So, if you're interested in diplomatic history and the history of geopolitics, Trieste is quite an interesting city because it goes from, Austrian hands, mostly Italians, and Slovenians, mostly, and so forth. And then it's, pushed around into a bunch of different countries until it finally lands again in Italy, and especially Istria, which I just find to be a very beautiful place, very interesting place, and ethnically and linguistically quite diverse. I hope everybody found that to be interesting. I know sometimes history like this can be a little dry, but I really enjoy learning about different languages, different interpretations of the language. If anybody here, we all use YouTube because we're all on YouTube. You can Google what the Istro-Romanian language looks like and sounds like, as well as the Istriot language. You can find documentaries and videos of people talking um, those languages. And again, my interpretation is at least the Istro-Romanian sounds a lot more like Romanian, and it has a few words interjected into them that they have borrowed from Croatian. More details on that on my History of Romania video. And then for Istriot, you will find some videos on YouTube of the fishermen in their fishing boats, doing their work as fishermen, gutting fish, cleaning fish, and speaking Istriot. And again, to me and from afar, it sounds a lot more like Italian, more flowing, and so forth. So, thank you everyone for watching. I hope you enjoyed it because again, this is one of my first sort of history lectures. I will have more to do of history lectures. I've got two on Germany after World War I, which I do hope you find exciting. I also have others again on ethnic history and language history that I can put up in the future as well. For those who are interested, I do have a poll on my community tab. Please go over there and tell me which subject you would like me to talk about for Wednesday. The choices are either what we might call um, histories and theories of communism and revolution, sort of aftermarks, which is what happens when the revolution doesn't come or didn't come, and we'll take a look at revolutionary versus reformed ideas, violence and nonviolence, and we'll get into authoritarianism, democratic socialism, and left wing stuff, and as well as the libertarian varieties. And I'll make it kind of condensed. Um, and we can look after that and what happened the moment that Marx dies, Engels dies. People are like, well, we were supposed to have a revolution. It was supposed to be imminent. So we'll talk about some of the ideas of those then. So throughout the late 19th century and into early 20th century. And then the one after that is on Scientology, because a lot of people ask us ex-Scientologists if Scientology can ever be reformed and what would it look like. And I do have some interesting thoughts on that if you want to hear it. So please vote for one or the other, whichever one you'd like. And I think next week, next Saturday, we'll be back to the regular time on the regular date. And I believe at that point, I am going to do something in the realm of history. I also have two PowerPoints, one on Russian minorities in the former Soviet Union, and one actually I would really like to give if I get it done, which is the history and examination and explanation of the Jewish ethnic divisions, as well as we might call them denominations or movements. So the differences between like Reform Orthodox conservative Judaism and the difference between Ashkenazi, Sephardic, and Mizrahi Judaism. So if I get done that PowerPoint by next, 6 days, next Saturday, I'll do that one. If not, we'll do another history of Germany or something like this. So once again, thank you, everyone. I'm really, really happy to see Irish Mart, Pete, Peter, Chad, Joe. Thank you, everyone who supports me. Please like and subscribe this. I really wish that all of you had a really great weekend. I hope that you also have a really great week. For me, the weather's been great. So I'm going to be getting out more this week, thankfully, because it's not boiling hot anymore. It's just perfect. We have had some floods in Hungary, as I mentioned in my last stream. By the end of the week, the water level should return to normal, but it's been a little weird because I've never seen the Danube flood. Like there's actual stations, ferry stations, and ports that the river cruises go into, and they dock and things like this, and they're all flooded. So we haven't had like any kind of river cruise tourism now for a couple weeks. And a station that I like to buy a ferry ticket in is literally underwater. It's very bizarre. Thankfully, thankfully with the river, um, the banks and stuff are pretty far from residential areas, and I'm fairly far from from the river. I mean, I'm not exactly like miles and miles far. I can walk there, with 15 minutes, but the water level is not that bad where I'm getting affected. And I do think there are people who are affected in outside of Budapest. So it is quite frustrating as well as in Austria and stuff. But at least thankfully for my situation, we seem to be okay. So hopefully within the next few days, water level goes down and the weather continues to be nice. And then I will see you all on Wednesday, which is the 25th of September. So until then, and in case I don't see you, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night.